Well, hello again, everyone. Welcome to online lecture number 2. And yes, you get to start with another picture of me. I'm going to try to get into a little routine here, and that's how we started class. So that's how we'll start these video lectures. And then we'll go right into our whiteboard and what we have coming up. So on Friday of this week at midnight, the Chapter 8 quiz. Obviously, we're going to finish Chapter 8 today, having started it on Monday. And then just work on your business plans. Their next interim submission isn't due until April 8th, so you've got plenty of time before you have to do that. That one's on marketing strategy, and the next chapter we're going to cover is marketing. So that will go over a lot of the stuff that you'll have to do. Until then, just continue to address those deficiencies that I pointed out in my feedback to you. So, just a quick reminder, this is Chapter 8, and on Monday we talked about teamwork. So today, our topic is going to be communications. And let's start with what effective communication is. So the top bullet there is a definition of communication, what it is. And interesting that managers spend about 80% of their time communicating. Seems like a lot. But when you think of what goes into that, well, let's think of some of those things. Talking, listening, on the phone, sending emails, reading reports, writing reports, meetings, presentations, business lunches and dinners, conferences, you name it. 80% might actually be low. So as future managers, you're going to be spending a lot of your time communicating. So, important chapter here. Many recruiters do rate this as the top skill they're looking for in college graduates. There have been numerous studies that state this. This is just one of those studies, and it took a look at 1,000 different employers. So quite a big study here, and I just wanted to reference that for a minute here. Let's see, here we go. So this was a 2018 study, so relatively recent, and the very first thing, a new survey shows that communication skills tops the list of things that college recruiters are looking for. So 1,000 employers, so that's a lot. And then they listed them all, and I think this was a pretty interesting graph. So communication skills are the ones here in purple. And if you look at what the most important skills were, 4 of the first 5 were in the heading of communication. Oral communication, listening skills, written communication, presentation skills, right up there on the top. So very important for both your success in business and in getting a job. Because right here it says, in the words of a recruiter from a large U.S. company, everyone coming out of business school seems to have the technological familiarity we require. It's soft skills like communications and people skills that tend to make the difference. And that's true. Because when you come out, you're going to be very similar in that you'll be able to do the job once you get to the interview stage. And it's really going to be how you come across your people skills that'll tend to get you hired, hopefully. So in an interview, what might you do to demonstrate communication skills? Well, some of the things we talked about in class: no phone in the reception area, firm handshake, make eye contact, no slouching, sit up straight, dress well, know the company, do your research, and anticipate questions that they could ask. All things you might do to demonstrate those good communication skills, both in advance and while you're at the interview. How about after the interview? Is there anything you can do to demonstrate communication skills after the interview? Well, one thing I'd suggest you always do is send a thank you note. At a minimum, send a follow-up email thanking whoever you interviewed with for the interview. But a thank you note is really a nice touch because most people don't do that. So whenever I got one of those, I was impressed. I thought somebody kind of went over and above, the normal there. So that's something I would suggest you all do. Okay, so let's move on to our next slide. Important communication skills in the workplace. So similar. So this is from a College Board survey where they asked companies what is almost always important in the workplace. And this was the response. And if you look at the top two, it agrees with what we just looked at. Sending business emails, written communications, and presentations with visuals, very important. Top the list. And the presentations with visuals, that being important, that's really why we were supposed to do two in this class, both the SWOT analysis project and the business plan project. Of course, given what's happened with the coronavirus, you won't be doing any, but that's why I wanted you to do that, because it is important in business. And so we're going to talk a little more today about business emails, what goes into a good business email, as well as presentations with visuals. And don't think that it's only the senior executives that deal with presentations with visuals. At all of our pitches, we purposely brought young people to the pitch. Now, why would we do that? Why would we make sure we had a young person at the presentation? Well, it's a number of reasons. One, generally speaking, they're the ones who are going to be doing the work. They were the day-to-day contacts with our clients in many cases. I wasn't going to be doing the day-to-day work. I'd go to the presentation and do an opening and a closing, but then I'd leave it to the people that are actually going to be doing the work, because that's who the client wants to hear from. We also know that diverse teams tend to outperform, so you want to have a team that's diverse in age as well as other factors. Young people are generally better at things like technology, social media, trends, popular culture, so useful to have that ingredient at a pitch. It was also good training. So if young people are coming to a pitch early, as they moved up in the organization, they'd already had that experience. So a number of good reasons that we brought young people to our presentations. Formal communication flows in an organization. So generally speaking, formal communication flows three ways. It can flow downward, so that's essentially from the boss to those who report to the boss. And let's see, some examples of that is just the boss telling you what to do, presiding at meetings, sending emails, company newsletters, websites, codes of conduct. We looked at Facebooks. All those examples of communication flowing downward in an organization. It can also flow up from employees to supervisors, conversations, giving input in meetings, emails, surveys, focus groups, any type of systems where employees can give input, are examples of upward communication. And then finally, horizontal or lateral communication is among people at the same level. And in an organization, what do you think is the most prevalent of those three? Downward, upward, or horizontal? Yeah, pretty much downward is what is kind of the status quo. And as future managers, one thing you have to look out for is that can overwhelm or stifle upward communication if you're not careful. You have to ensure that there is upward because there's always going to be downward. And in that vein, I'm going to show you a short video of a PhD who talks about the importance for future managers of making sure that there's upward communication in your organization.
Most organizations are designed in ways that communication flows down the chain of command, top down. In very few instances are there systems in place to make sure that bottom-up communication happens effectively. And there's a huge advantage to doing this properly, so let's unpack it. Hello again, friends. I'm Alex Line. If we haven't met yet, this channel, Communication Coach, is here to help rising leaders increase your impact so you can lead your teams to higher levels of excellence. I'm talking about frontline leaders like team leaders, supervisors, and managers. This channel is for you. And today's topic is communication, that balance between top-down versus bottom-up communication. I write about this in my new book in a couple of the chapters. It's really a critical notion to get our heads around. So the first thing I want to say is that most organizations are designed through and through so that communication goes from top to bottom. We call this a hierarchy or a chain of command. It's modeled after a military design, and that's the way it is built. So in almost every case, unless you work really hard to do something different, that's the way information is going to flow. Now, it's true that as leaders, you're probably going to hear a lot of people griping and complaining, but that's usually not high quality information that you can do anything about. That's just human nature. What we don't often have is information going up the chain of command in a really reliable way. So there are some obstacles to explain why this doesn't happen in a normal chain of command situation. The first one is the psychological contract that Bissell, Messersmith, and Kelly talk about in their research. When we come to work, supervisors expect to issue the orders, and employees expect this too. So there's a relationship that we assume about the workplace when we arrive, and for that reason alone, a lot of times we don't feel as employees that it's our job to pass up information. So we often don't. We keep our mouths shut. The second major obstacle is fear. You might sour your relationship with the boss. You might have that fear. So if you tell the boss something, maybe he or she feels connected to that project, so they feel personally criticized if you share that. It's one of the reasons why employees don't want to tell the boss some negative information. Another one is fear that you might be labeled as a troublemaker, someone that's going to rock the boat. Oh, that's that person complaining again. And then the third fear, of course, is retaliation. One of the whole reasons we have an expression like "don't shoot the messenger" is because oftentimes when people share information, people criticize and discredit you, and we do shoot the messenger. So those are some of the reasons why we don't pass information naturally up the chain of command. And the third thing I want to talk about is the result. The result of this is that the decision makers in the organization often are out of touch with the day-to-day operations of the frontline employees, supervisors, and managers. They don't have good information from that level of the organization. And that's a level of organization that's doing almost all of the work with clients and customers. So they have incredibly valuable intel and insight and feedback, but there's really often no channel to pass it upward. And then the leaders make these decisions, and everybody seems mystified, like, why in the world would we want to do that? That's a horrible idea. So the benefit of upward communication is better decision-making intel. And I really believe that leaders of the future need to take upward communication seriously. In my book, I recommend developing what I call dedicated channels for upward communication. And I'm not going to go into all of the details. Maybe we'll do that in a different video, but you want to do regular employee surveys. And then when you get the results, you have to take action based upon those results. You can't just put it in a drawer and say, oh, well, we'll do it again in 6 months and see if it's changed. You can also do focus groups around particular issues to really dig into it. There are a lot of ways to do this well, to develop upward communication. And so I think the main bottom line here is that left on its own, the hierarchy will let information flow down, but you have to develop dedicated channels to pass good information up the chain of command to get this equation in a little bit more of a balance, to develop a healthier, more effective workplace.
So I think that's well said. The point that you are the ones that are touching the customers right now in your jobs. You see customers every day. You have great intelligence. You know what they want. So organizations should be listening to you. So as future managers, you have to find ways for that communication to flow upward and not just downward. If you remember when we talked about org charts, I said that one thing my company did was to have an upside down org chart. So it was that upside down triangle. And the whole point was to put customers and clients on the top, and the people that touch the customers and clients, the yous of the world, were right there. And then it went down to the people on the top. It's the same really concept that this guy is talking about. Make sure there's upward communication channels. So, important point. Okay, let's talk about different forms of communication. We just talked about internal, which is communication within the company. There's also external communication between people within the company and outside the company. So, who could that include? Well, investors, clients, customers, vendors, suppliers, job applicants, government, community. There's all sorts of stakeholders that are external to a company. And so most companies have some separate discipline or departments that deal largely just with these external stakeholders. Corporate communications, sometimes referred to as public relations. There's similar departments. That's really their job, is dealing with the public. Investor relations, investor dealing with them. Government relations, also known as lobbying. Marketing, dealing with customers. HR, they're dealing with applicants from the outside and the government. Finance, dealing with the SEC, the IRS, the government, investors. All these departments within many organizations exist for the most part to deal with external parties. And then we have formal and informal flows. We just took a look at the formal flows. That's the one along the official lines of authority. There's also informal flows of information, and that's sometimes referred to as the grapevine. You may have heard that term before. Why is it called that? Well, as you can see in that graphic there, essentially in a grapevine, everything is interconnected. So everything touches, things can move quickly in the grapevine. That's why it's called that. So it's important to realize that in an organization, a grapevine exists. The information in a grapevine is usually not wrong. It's usually not wrong. Now, is there gossip in a grapevine? Typically there is. It's kind of human nature. So that kind of comes with the territory. But a couple of things to know about it as future managers. One, you should manage the information so that the grapevine doesn't become the main source of information. You don't want that to happen. And you do that by having a transparent organization. And by that I mean sharing information openly with the people in your company. If you're a public company, there's certain things you have to share. But as a private company, you should do the same thing. We were a private company, and we would be as open as we could be about how the company doing. Are we winning? Are we losing contracts? Who just joined us? We would send as managers a quarterly video every 3 months, obviously, that just talked to all employees about how we doing. We meeting budget or are we not? Who joined the company? Who has an anniversary? What's coming up? What are our goals moving forward? And I would get more positive feedback from those videos from people I saw in the company than almost anything else we did. I found that people are interested in what the company's doing. And so it's a good idea to be as transparent as possible and provide that information. I guess the final thing I'd say about the grapevine is you have to be attuned to it. It gives you a good feel for morale. It does give you a good feel for, hey, do people like it here? Are they satisfied? Are they motivated? Do they enjoy it? And there's a management consultant named Tom Peters you may have heard of. And he had a famous phrase called MBWA. MBWA. And he referred to that as management by walking around. And by that he meant you can get a ton of good information literally by getting out from behind your desk and walking around and talking to your employees, your clients, your customers, the people who are producing your goods, the people who are providing you services. Just get out there and talk to them. It's just a great way of managing. You can't sit behind your desk as managers. You have to get out there. And that really helps with upward communication. You're talking to the people on the ground who are providing the service. So, something to keep in mind. Communication channels. So this is a good summary of what we just talked about. There are internal channels and external channels and formal and informal channels. And this table just provides descriptions and examples of each. And as you know, all these PowerPoint slides are on our Blackboard site if you want to go back and look at any of this. Barriers to communication. Kind of makes me think back to Chapter 3, which is our global trade chapter. And we talked about barriers to international trade. And among the barriers we discussed to international trade were there are cultural barriers, economic barriers, legal barriers, political barriers. All of those things tend to inhibit international trade. Well, in the workplace, there's also barriers to communication. And so we're going to talk about two broad categories of those. The first, there's cultural barriers. Language, customs, interests, beliefs, values. Kind of similar to some of the stuff we talked about with international trade. And so the question could be, okay, we know those barriers exist, but so what? I mean, what do we do about that? And I would answer this accordingly. In order for you to be able to manage this, to lessen the barriers, to help eliminate the barriers, you gotta know that they're out there. So with cultural barriers, I wanted to give you a couple of examples. And I'm going to pull up a quick video. It's only 3 minutes, but they go through 10 barriers to effective communication in the workplace in 3 minutes. And I think they did a nice job here. It was from a Young Entrepreneurs Forum. So let's click on that and see if we can bring this up.
Ten barriers to effective communication. 1. Physical barriers. These are such things as inadequate equipment, such as outdated computers, phones with poor signals, background noise, poor lighting, temperatures that are too hot or too cold, tangible items that may interfere with communication efforts. 2. Attitudes. Sometimes strong emotions like anger or sadness can taint your objectivity. Being extremely nervous, having a personal agenda, or asserting a need to win the argument can make communications less than effective. Such interfering emotions are also known as emotional noise. 3. Language. This may seem like a minor obstacle, but even people who speak the same native language can have difficulty understanding each other if they are from different generations or different regions of the same country. Slang, professional jargon, and regional colloquialisms can hurt communicators with even the best intentions. 4. Physiological barriers. Ill health, poor eyesight, hearing difficulties, and pain are all physiological obstacles to effective communication. 5. Problems with structured design. Companies or institutions can have unclear organizational structures, making communications difficult. Bad information systems, lack of supervision, and employee training are also to blame for faulty communications. 6. Cultural noise. People sometimes make assumptions about others based on their cultural background and associated stereotypes. 7. Lack of common experience. It's a great idea to use examples or stories to explain or enhance a point. However, if others cannot relate to these examples because they do not have the same knowledge or shared experiences, then this tool will be ineffective. 8. Ambiguity and overuse of abstractions. Leaving things half said or using too many generalizations, proverbs, or sayings can lead to lack of clarity, which in turn lends itself to misinterpretation. 9. Information overload. It takes time to process large quantities of information, and too many details can overwhelm and distract the audience from the important topics. 10. Jumping to conclusions. Making assumptions before listening to all the facts can be problematic in the least and catastrophic at worst.
So, pretty good. We went over 10 different cultural barriers, and so knowing that these exist makes it easier to figure out, all right, how can I deal with these? What can I do to lessen them? So there's also functional barriers to communication in organizations. And in some cases, some of the departments in an organization can have competing interests. It's not necessarily true that all departments are aligned. In some cases, there's a natural tension that exists between departments. And in my experience, those three are ones that I've seen. Marketing versus operations. Why might there be a natural tension there? Well, think about marketing, trying to go out and make the sale. Oh, we can do that. Sure, we can do that. Yeah, and you need it in that time frame? Sure, we can do that. No problem. Whereas operations are the people that actually have to produce that. And they may be thinking, well, not so easy to do this. We can't really add this feature. No, we can't get it done by this time. So there can be a natural tension between those two departments. Similarly with sales and accounting. The sales people are out, I need this. Got to go take this client to lunch. I need to send them this. I need to travel there and do this. We need to do this. It's going to cost this much, but we have to make the sale. Whereas accounting, on the other hand, generally speaking, is really looking at the dollars a lot more, saying, this is costing us a lot of money if this sale doesn't go through. So there could be a natural tension there too. Executives versus human resources. Now why might that be a natural tension between those two? Well, in some cases, executives are like, I just want this person on my team. I want to do this. I want to move this person up. I want to promote them. I don't want this person with us anymore. And they just want to make it happen immediately. Whereas human resources knows there's a million laws out there that you have to go through and make sure you're doing it properly. And so sometimes there can be some tension between those groups as well. So, functional barriers. Knowing they exist and you're aware of them makes it a lot easier for you to manage and hopefully lessen and eliminate. Okay, business emails. As I promised at the beginning. So, on that College Board survey, if you remember, this was the #1 communication skill that employers listed, is being able to send a good business email. So let's just take a look at a couple of different items that'll be important to you when you're in business as full-time employees sending emails. #1, meaningful subject line. Kind of like an executive summary in your business plan. In some cases, this is all they're going to look at because people can get 100, 200 emails a day in business and they just don't have time to read everything. So you got to have a subject line that's meaningful and makes sense, and it'll get people to open it up. Appropriate addressees. Don't hit reply all unless everybody needs to see what your response is. Okay? Don't just send stuff to anybody. Make sure it's people that need to see the email. Consider the degree of formality. Emails are not texts, right? A text looks one way, an email looks a second way. Generally speaking, if you're not sure how formal it should be, err on the side of being formal in an email. Focused, to the point, don't ramble in them. Respect, restraint, of course. Provides a record. What's that mean? Obviously, emails are never going to go away. Once they're written, whatever you said will be there forever. That's just one part of it. A second part of it is emails are discoverable. Discoverable. What does that mean? Well, in a legal context, when there's litigation, if somebody sues your company or you're suing another company, there is a process called discovery where if the company that's suing your company says, hey, we want all this documentation to be turned over because we think it's relevant to the lawsuit, your company has to turn over that information. So you could be turning over emails that another company wants. It's part of discovery. And so you have to keep that in mind, that anytime you craft an email, you don't know where that's going to go. It could be part of litigation. And it's the reason that most civil cases are settled before they ever go to trial. Because generally speaking, after discovery, both sides have a pretty good idea, now we know how strong our side is and how strong their side is, and it really helps them to come together and settle before it goes to trial. So, something to keep in mind. Assume it will be forwarded. Again, similar. Anything that goes to that email, you just have to assume it could go to any person, it could go to the entire company, it could go to a newspaper. Keep that in mind when you write emails. Respond promptly and proofread. So before you hit send, that bottom graphic there, you should look over that email 2 or 3 times, make sure there's no errors, grammatical problems, any of that. Important. Presentation skills. Well, you're not going to have to present anymore in this class, so I guess you lucked out there, because my guess is that most of you probably are not crazy about public speaking. And as that top box shows there, in the top 10 fears for some people, public speaking is number 1. Death is number 2. So can't get much higher than that. And I get it. I get it. But because it's so important in business, that's why I wanted you to do presentations in this class. And it really is unfortunate that we won't be doing them, because it would have been good practice. But in any event, there are a couple things we can talk about, even though you won't be doing them. And one is Toastmasters, that graphic down there. You've probably heard of Toastmasters, and if you note what their tagline is, where leaders are made, it really goes together that if you get good at speaking in public, that's kind of what most leaders are able to do. They've had enough practice that they're good at it. And so it really is something that you should work on and get better at. Montgomery College has their own chapter of Toastmasters. It meets on the first Friday of every month at the Rockville campus, and I'm sure it'll be off for a while now, but something you might want to look into. They have a chapter right at Montgomery College, and it couldn't be more convenient for you. So, when putting together a presentation, the 4 P's is something you should keep in mind. Plan, prepare, practice, present. Starting with plan. Know who your audience is. If they know what the topic is, that's one way to craft how you're going to talk to them. If they have no idea, you have to talk to them a different way. How much time do you have for your presentation? What's the room look like? What's the IT that's going to be there? Do I need to give handouts? All that stuff you have to think about in advance. Prepare. Generally speaking, most presentations have an opening, a body, and a close. So in an opening, tell what you're going to tell. The body, tell. And then in the close, tell what you told. That's essentially what many presentations can come down to. Practice. That's the most important. You got to know your material, and the more you practice it, the better you're going to be. Can't really stress that enough. What I would do is I would actually get in my office before a presentation or a speech I had to make and literally give the speech to the window. And that's because I could hear my voice. And it's completely different when you hear your voice as opposed to just sitting there at the desk and thinking, okay, I'm going to say this, I'm going to say that, I'm going to say this. It makes a difference. I'd be driving to the presentation and I'd be giving it in my car. Again, I could hear my voice, and boy, did that make a difference. So if you have to give a presentation, I'm going to recommend that. Find some place where you're not just sitting there thinking, okay, I'll say this, I'll say that. You're actually saying it. It'll help you recall it, and it'll say, well, this does sound good, or this doesn't sound so good. And then finally, present. When you go for the day you're going to present, you got to dress the part, look good. It's fine to bring notes, no problem there. And the audience generally can't tell you're nervous unless you draw attention to it. Don't say stuff like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm so nervous. Oh, I'm lost. Oh, I forgot. Don't say any of that. The audience has no idea what you're going to say, what you were supposed to say, or any of that. So don't draw attention to it. They won't know unless you do that. So some things to keep in mind. And I want to show you just a short video that a student did. It's only 2.5 minutes of some do's and don'ts for student presentations. I think this student did a pretty good job at this. So let me see if I can bring this up.
Marketing is an activity set for institutions and process for creating.
Most girls say, can you call me back? I'm having a presentation right now. Yeah.
Have the value for customers, clients, partners, and society at large. Values for customers. Writing does not mean a task or a mission at point to Lexi.
So I thought he did a pretty good job. You know, he really touched on a number of things that you should and shouldn't do. So something to keep in mind when you do actually get to do presentations. PowerPoint slides. So this goes with the presentations. So when you're putting together the slides, some things to keep in mind. 1, the slides are the background. You're generally going to have people looking at you, not the slides. So you really don't want to have lots of sentences and paragraphs and things like that on the slides. Keep them very short, keep them very succinct. They're there to guide the audience and to focus you. So again, don't put a lot of stuff on your slides. I always thought, and we were taught, think of a slide as a magazine ad, not as an instructional manual. Okay, when you think of a magazine ad, what do you think? Glossy, graphics, nice pictures, not a lot of text. That's what you want to keep in mind. Okay? Generally speaking, 1 idea per slide. Less is more. Next idea, just put it on another slide. Generally speaking, you want to have 3 to 5 bullets on a slide, generally speaking. Okay, there's 3 on this one, and then a couple of sub-bullets. Easier to follow than just jamming a bunch of bullets on a slide. Quality graphics, Okay, you can go to Google Images and get thousands of graphics. Get good ones, ones that are professional and ones that look good. And then easy to read. Wherever the back row is going to be in your presentation, you have to make sure that those individuals can read your slides. So keep the text large. Just some thoughts on how to make PowerPoint slides. And with that, we've got one final slide for the day and one final slide for the chapter. And it's important. Nonverbal communication. Transmitting messages without using language. And this is everything from appearance, gestures, posture, eye contact, voice, facial expressions, clothing. That graphic there is a pretty good illustration of that. And nonverbal communication, very important. Probably more important than what you say in a lot of cases, potentially in an interview, in a presentation. This says some studies estimate that 70% of interpersonal communication is conveyed nonverbally. There was one famous study that said in a speech about 7%, 7 were the impact that people got from what the person was saying was based on their words. 38% was based on their voice, their tone, how confident they sounded, how comfortable they felt, how relaxed they looked. And then 55% was their body language. That's a lot. So 93% in that study was nonverbal versus 7% words. And if you think about who's a good speaker, who can you think of that's a good speaker? And a lot of times people will think, okay, politicians, we hear them speak all the time, and people will think, you know, Obama was a good speaker, Trump's a good speaker. Putting politics aside, good speakers, right? They can really hold an audience. Now think about why. What is it about Obama and or Trump that makes them good speakers? And if you're thinking about that, my guess is you're thinking, you know what? They're comfortable, they're confident, they've got humor, they just feel casual, and it could be like I'm just talking to them in any setting. And if you think about it, all those things are nonverbal. If you think about why they're good speakers, you hardly ever say, well, here's specifically what they said in some speech. It's rarely something verbal. It almost always comes down to the nonverbal. So as you're preparing to do presentations or an interview, you have to give that a lot of thought. Don't spend all your time on, all right, here's what I'm going to say, because how you're going to say it, how you're going to communicate nonverbally is going to be at least as important to the people you're interviewing with or you're presenting to. So that is critical for you to think about. How am I going to do that? One very famous example of the importance of nonverbal communication, talking about history like we did on Monday, was the presidential debate of 1960. And in that debate, it was JFK Kennedy against Richard Nixon. And it was actually television's first televised debate. And the interesting thing about that debate was that the people that listened to it on radio, because back then radio was the primary medium, TV was just coming into being, the people that heard that debate on radio thought, you know what, we think Nixon won that debate. But the people that saw it on TV had a different opinion. They thought, you know what, Kennedy won that debate. And when you look at the two individuals, and I'm going to pull up a picture in a second, you see Kennedy. Here's this young, handsome, smiling, he's tanned, he was well rested, he actually took a nap that day, calm and confident individual. And then you saw Nixon. You know, he was kind of pale, he was sickly, he had just been in the hospital recently. He had been campaigning all day, so he's kind of sweaty and tired. He's got a 5 o'clock shadow. He's got kind of a gray suit on that doesn't really contrast well with the background. And he just didn't look the part that Kennedy did. And let's pull this up. So, boy, you see that picture? Not what a debate looks like today, does it? Right? They're both sitting in little chairs with his tiny little desk in the middle. But there's, you know, Kennedy looking good. And let's scroll down a little bit. You know, he's got that nice dark suit. He looks comfortable. He looks relaxed. Now look at Nixon. You can see the 5 o'clock, shadow there a little bit, and he's sick. And so it's just interesting that the people that saw it on television said Kennedy won, but the people that listened to it that didn't have the benefit of nonverbal communication thought that Nixon won. And the interesting thing was when it actually came down to the election, Kennedy obviously won the election. You know how many votes he got? 34.2 million votes. How many votes do you think Nixon got? The answer is 34.1 million votes. Yeah, there was a difference of about 100,000 votes in over 68 million that were cast. So you could actually make the argument that nonverbal communication is what gave Kennedy the election over Nixon back in 1960. So again, the importance of nonverbal communication, whether it's in politics or whatever you'll be doing moving forward, important. And with that, we are all set. If you have questions on anything in this chapter, whether it's on communication that we talked about today or on teamwork that we talked about on Monday, obviously feel free to email me. We've got the quiz due on Friday. And so with that, stay safe, everybody. And on Monday, we'll send you a video and we'll start Chapter 9, Marketing. Thank you. Take care.